I need a job. The words hung in the air of the 42nd floor corner office like a confession. Dominic Ashford stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, dark circles shadowing eyes that had once sparkled with unearned confidence. His suit, while tailored, was off the rack. A far cry from the bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo he had worn 5 years ago when he abandoned his bride at the altar in front of 500 witnesses. Vivienne Moreau did not look up from the acquisition proposal on her desk. Her pen continued moving across the page with measured precision. When she finally raised her eyes, her expression held the temperature of a winter morning. "You are asking me for employment." Dominic swallowed hard. "I have experience in luxury markets, high-level negotiations, and strategic partnerships." Vivienne set down her pen with deliberate slowness. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the detached interest of an entomologist examining an insect pinned to a board. "You have experience destroying everything you touch." "I have followed Ashford Holdings' collapse with great interest." Color drained from Dominic's face. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes." The word left her lips like a blade. "Is that what you call leaving me at the altar in front of 500 people? A mistake? Or perhaps you mean the affair you conducted with my cousin while I was tasting wedding cakes and choosing flowers. Was that a mistake too?" "I was wrong." His voice cracked. "About everything. I know that now. How convenient that you have developed self-awareness exactly when you need something from me." The man who had once promised her forever now stood before her desk, begging for scraps. And Vivienne Moreau, the woman he had left crying in the rain, held all the power. But this story does not start here. This story starts 5 years earlier, on what should have been the happiest day of Vivienne's life. Have you ever trusted someone with your entire future, only to watch them destroy it in front of everyone you know? Have you ever been so humiliated that you wanted to disappear forever? What would you do if the person who shattered your world came crawling back, desperate and broken? If you have ever felt underestimated or betrayed, you are going to want to hear every word of this. Hit that subscribe button because stories like this do not come around often. This is the story of how one woman turned her greatest humiliation into her most powerful revenge. The rain had not been forecasted. Vivienne Moreau stood beneath the silk canopy of the garden terrace at Chateau Belmont, watching dark clouds gather over the manicured lawns where 500 guests sat in neat rows of white chairs. Her wedding dress, a custom Valentino creation that had taken 8 months to complete, felt suddenly heavy against her skin. Pearl-encrusted lace traced delicate patterns across her shoulders, each bead hand sewn by artisans in Rome. The veil, inherited from her grandmother, cascaded down her back like a waterfall of antique Brussels lace. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 7 years old. The string quartet began the processional. Pachelbel's canon in D floated through the humid air. Vivienne's father, Philippe Moreau, squeezed her hand gently. His eyes, the same shade of warm honey as her own, glistened with unshed tears. "You look like your mother did on our wedding day," he whispered in French, their private language of affection. "Absolutely radiant, ma chérie." Vivienne managed a smile, though her stomach twisted with something she could not name. Nerves, she told herself. Just nerves. Every bride felt this flutter of anxiety before walking down the aisle. At the altar stood Dominic Ashford, devastatingly handsome in his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of chiseled features that belonged on magazine covers, he should have taken her breath away. They had been together for 3 years. 3 whirlwind years of charity galas, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and carefully orchestrated social media moments that made them the envy of Manhattan's elite. Dominic came from old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. The Ashford name opened doors that even Vivienne's considerable family wealth could not. His great-grandfather had built a shipping empire. His grandfather had diversified into real estate. His father had added luxury hotels to the portfolio. Dominic, groomed from birth to continue the legacy, sat on the boards of half a dozen companies before he turned 30. Vivian had met him at a Met Gala after-party. She had been 24, fresh from completing her MBA at Columbia, armed with ideas about revolutionizing her family's struggling luxury leather goods company. He had been 28, confident and charming, with a smile that promised adventure and a future written in platinum. "You are Philippe Moreau's daughter," he had said, cornering her near the champagne fountain. "I have been reading about Maison Moreau. Your father's company is in trouble." Most people would have softened the observation, wrapped it in pleasantries. Dominic's bluntness had been refreshing at the time. "We have had some difficult quarters," Vivian had replied carefully, though difficult was a generous term for the catastrophic losses that had plagued the 70-year-old fashion house. "You need fresh vision. New markets. Your father is brilliant, but he is stuck in the past." Dominic had leaned closer, his cologne, something expensive and woody, invading her space. "I could help. I have connections in Asia, the Middle East. Markets hungry for European luxury with heritage." That conversation had led to dinner. Dinner had led to a strategic partnership between Ashford Holdings and Maison Moreau. The partnership had blossomed into romance. Or what Vivian had believed was romance. Looking back now, walking down the petal-strewn aisle while 500 faces turned toward her, Vivian wondered if she had ever truly known Dominic at all. The ceremony began with traditional vows. The officiant, a family friend who had baptized Vivian as an infant, spoke about love as a choice renewed each day. About partnership built on trust and mutual respect. About weathering storms together and emerging stronger. Vivian's hands trembled as she held her bouquet. White peonies and garden roses, their scent almost overwhelming in the humid air. Thunder rumbled in the distance, closer now. "Dominic Ashford," the officiant intoned, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Do you take Vivian Moreau to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The pause was barely noticeable. A fraction of a second. But Vivian felt it like a chasm opening beneath her feet. Dominic's jaw tightened. His blue eyes, usually so warm when they looked at her, flickered with something she had never seen before. Panic? Regret? Fear? He began. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. The pearl beading on her dress suddenly felt like it was crushing her chest. "I cannot do this." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. 500 guests collectively inhaled. The sound was like wine through bare branches, like the whisper before a scream. "What?" Vivian whispered, though she had heard him perfectly. Every syllable had been crystal clear. Dominic stepped back, putting physical distance between them. "I cannot marry you, Vivian. I am sorry." Sorry. The word meant nothing. It was air, empty and weightless. It was the sound of her entire world collapsing into rubble. "Dominic." Her father's voice cut through the shock, sharp with warning and rising fury. "What is the meaning of this?" But Dominic had already turned away from the altar. He fled down the aisle, his best man scrambling after him, confusion written across his face. Guests murmured, whispers building into a roar that filled Vivian's ears like ocean waves during a storm. She stood frozen, her bouquet slipping from numb fingers. White petals scattered across the ground, crushed beneath her grandmother's veil as she swayed. The horizon tilted. The faces of 500 people blurred into a sea of pity and shock and barely concealed fascination at the spectacle of her destruction. Her father caught her before she fell. The rain began in earnest then, as if the sky itself was weeping for her humiliation. Cold drops soaked through the silk canopy, through the antique lace, through the carefully applied makeup that now ran in black rivers down her cheeks. Someone screamed. It took Vivian a moment to realize the sound was coming from her own throat. The aftermath was a blur of concerned faces and invasive questions. Vivian's mother, Celeste, had wrapped her in a shawl and ushered her into the chateau's library while guests slowly, awkwardly dispersed. Some looked at her with pity. Others with barely concealed schadenfreude. The Moreau family brought low, their golden daughter jilted at the altar like a character in a cautionary tale. The press had a field day. Ashford heir abandons bride in spectacular wedding disaster. That was the New York Post headline the next morning. Page 6 ran unflattering photos of Vivian's tear-streaked face, mascara tracking black lines down her cheeks as her father helped her into their car. Her veil dragging in the mud. Her grandmother's precious heirloom, ruined. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Memes circulated. Strangers speculated about what she must have done to drive him away. What flaw she must have hidden. What inadequacy had been exposed at the last moment. But worse than the headlines were the rumors. Within 48 hours, the truth emerged like poison from a wound. Dominic had been having an affair with Vivian's second cousin, Margot Laurent. The relationship had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies while Vivian planned their wedding, chose flowers, tasted cakes, and dreamed of their future together. Margot was everything Vivian was not. Wild, impulsive, with a trust fund she burned through on yachts and parties in Ibiza. She had no interest in business or legacy, no drive to build anything lasting. She was, Vivian realized with bitter clarity, exactly the kind of woman Dominic wanted. Ornamental, undemanding, content to be an accessory to his life rather than a partner in it. The revelation that shattered Vivian most came from an interview Dominic gave to a business magazine 2 weeks after the wedding debacle. His PR team had clearly coached every word, but the meaning underneath was unmistakable. "I have tremendous respect for Vivian Moreau," he had said, his face composed in an expression of practiced regret. "But I realized I could not marry someone just because it made good business sense. The heart wants what it wants. Good business sense." As if their entire relationship had been a merger he had decided not to finalize. As if she had been a strategic acquisition rather than a woman he loved. As if 3 years of her life had been nothing more than a business calculation that did not pencil out. Vivian spent 3 days in bed, curtains drawn, refusing food and visitors. She existed in a gray fog of humiliation and grief. Her mother brought tea that went cold. Her father stood helplessly in the doorway, rage and sorrow warring on his weathered face. Friends called. She did not answer. On the 4th day, she woke before dawn. The fog had not lifted, but beneath it, something else stirred. Something hard and bright and sharp-edged. She walked into her father's study where he sat hunched over financial reports, looking every one of his 63 years. The lamp on his desk cast harsh shadows across documents covered in red numbers. "Show me everything," Vivian said. "Every loss, every debt, every mistake. I want to see it all." Philippe looked up, surprise registering on his face. "Ma chérie, you need time to heal." "Show me," Vivian repeated, steel entering her voice for the first time in her life. Her father studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded and slid the reports across the desk. Maison Moreau was dying. The numbers laid it bare with brutal honesty. Years of declining sales, failed product lines, and competition from younger, hungrier brands had eroded the company's foundation. The partnership with Ashford Holdings had been their last lifeline. And Dominic had withdrawn at the moment he walked away from the altar. "We have perhaps 6 months before we will need to declare bankruptcy," Philippe admitted, defeat heavy in his words. "I am sorry, Vivian. I have failed you. Failed your grandfather's legacy." Vivian studied the spreadsheets, the projections, the inventory reports. Somewhere beneath the grief and humiliation, her mind, the same brilliant mind that had graduated top of her class at Columbia, began to work. "We are approaching this wrong," she said slowly. "We have been trying to compete with fast fashion and contemporary brands. We will never win that game. Then what do you suggest? Her father asked, indulging her though his tone suggested he had already given up. We go the opposite direction. Ultra-luxury. Exclusivity. Limited editions. Vivian's hands moved across the papers, her thoughts crystallizing into strategy. Maison Moreau is not for everyone. It never was. We stopped trying to be accessible and become untouchable. Over the following months, Vivian threw herself into saving the company with the single-minded intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. She traveled to Milan, Paris, Tokyo, meeting with artisans and luxury retailers. She learned leatherworking from masters in Florence. She studied supply chains in Switzerland. She redesigned the entire product line, cutting anything that whispered of mass appeal and focusing on exquisite craftsmanship that justified eye-watering prices. She learned her father's business inside and out. The suppliers, the manufacturers, the delicate relationships that sustained a fashion house. At night, she studied her competitors, analyzing what made Hermès untouchable, what gave Bottega Veneta its cult following, and why women waited years for a Chanel bag. The transformation was not immediate. For the first year, sales continued to decline as Vivian repositioned the brand. Critics called her reckless. Industry insiders predicted Maison Moreau would be defunct within 18 months. Fashion bloggers wrote think pieces about nepotism and privilege, about daughters destroying their fathers' legacies. But Vivian had learned something valuable from her humiliation. She had nothing to prove to anyone except herself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A duchess attending a charity luncheon in London carried a Moreau clutch from the new collection. A butter-soft leather piece with hand-carved jade clasps that took 2 weeks to create. A photographer caught the image. Within days, inquiries flooded in from stylists, collectors, and fashion editors who suddenly remembered that Maison Moreau had been, decades ago, the height of European elegance. Scarcity became Maison Moreau's signature. Vivian instituted a strict policy. No more than 50 pieces of any design would ever be produced. Waiting lists formed overnight. Prices climbed to eye-watering heights. The brand that had been gasping its last breath became the most coveted name in luxury accessories. If everyone can have it, no one will want it. Vivian told her father as orders poured in from Dubai, Singapore, New York, Los Angeles. 3 years after being left at the altar, Vivian stood in front of the New York Stock Exchange, hand poised over the button that would take Maison Moreau public. Her father stood beside her, tears of pride streaming down his face. Celeste beamed from the side, a mother's vindication written across her elegant features. The stock opened at $48 per share. By market close, it had climbed to $73. Vivian Moreau, at 29 years old, became the youngest female CEO of a publicly traded luxury goods company. More than that, she became a billionaire in her own right, her personal stake in the company worth just over $1.2 billion. Forbes featured her on their cover. The Phoenix of Fashion, How Vivian Moreau Rose from Wedding Day Ashes to Build a Billion-Dollar Empire. She did not read the article. She did not need external validation anymore. Now, before I tell you what happened to Dominic during these years, I want to know. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing? Drop a comment and let me know your story. And if you are enjoying this, smash that like button. It really helps. While Vivian ascended, Dominic Ashford fell. The affair with Margot Laurent lasted exactly 11 months before she left him for a Formula One driver. The humiliation of being dumped by the woman he had abandoned his bride for was just the beginning of Dominic's unraveling. Ashford Holdings, it turned out, was not the impregnable fortress it appeared to be. Dominic's father, who had run the company with an iron fist for 40 years, suffered a massive stroke 6 months after the wedding disaster. Control passed to Dominic, who had always been more interested in the appearance of power than its substance. He had sat on boards. He had attended meetings. He had smiled for photos at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But he had never actually built anything. Never negotiated a real deal without his father's connections smoothing the way. Never made a hard decision that did not have a safety net underneath. Within a year, cracks appeared. A hotel development in Dubai collapsed amid corruption scandals. A real estate investment in Miami turned out to be built on fraudulent environmental surveys. The shipping division lost a major contract to a competitor who undercut them by 15% because Dominic had grown complacent, assured of loyalty that evaporated the moment a better offer appeared. Ashford Heir runs empire into ground. That was the Wall Street Journal headline. The Midas touch in reverse, how Dominic Ashford lost the family fortune. Bloomberg ran that one with a photo of him leaving a failed investor meeting, his expression dazed. By the time Vivian's company went public, Ashford Holdings was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Dominic had burned through his personal fortune trying to prop up failing ventures. The penthouse apartment, the same one where he and Vivian had once planned their future, was quietly listed for sale to cover mounting debts. His father, partially paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair, watched his life's work crumble under his son's incompetent stewardship. The disappointment in those eyes was worse than any headline. And Dominic, for the first time in his privileged life, knew what it meant to be afraid. 5 years after the wedding that never was, Vivian sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the building Maison Moreau had purchased in Midtown Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that had once witnessed her greatest humiliation and now bowed to her success. Central Park stretched out like a green refuge among the steel and glass. The Empire State Building rose in the distance, its spire catching the afternoon light. Her assistant, Grace, knocked gently on the open door. "Ms. Moreau. Your 3 o'clock is here." Vivian did not look up from the acquisition proposal she was reviewing. Maison Moreau was expanding into watchmaking, partnering with a Swiss atelier that had been crafting timepieces since 1848. "Send them in," she said absently. "Actually." Grace's voice held an odd note. "You should know who it is before." "Ms. Moreau." That voice. Vivian's pen stopped moving. 5 years had passed, but she would know that voice anywhere. The voice that had said "I cannot do this" while 500 people watched her world collapse. The voice that had haunted her dreams and fueled her ambition in equal measure. She looked up. Dominic Ashford stood in her doorway, and he looked like a man who had aged a decade in 5 years. His suit, while still well-tailored, was off the rack rather than bespoke. She could tell from the way it sat across his shoulders, just slightly imperfect. The confidence that had once radiated from him had dimmed to something closer to desperation. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shoulders carried the weight of failure like a physical burden. "Hello, Dominic," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "This is unexpected." He entered her office slowly, as if approaching a throne room. As if he understood the power dynamic had shifted so completely that the ground itself might open beneath him if he misstepped. "Thank you for seeing me. I was not aware I had a choice." She glanced at Grace, who looked apologetic. "It is fine, Grace. Hold my calls." When they were alone, silence stretched between them. Heavy with history, thick with unspoken words. The last time they had been in a room together, he had been walking away from her at the altar. Now he stood before her, hat in hand metaphorically, waiting for her to acknowledge his existence. Dominic broke first. "I saw the announcement about your Swiss partnership. Congratulations. You have built something remarkable." "Cut to it, Dominic. Why are you here?" He flinched at her directness. The old Vivian had been softer, more accommodating. This woman, elegant and untouchable in her charcoal Moreau suit, her dark hair swept into a flawless chignon, was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I need a job," he said finally, the words clearly costing him everything. Vivian blinked. Of all the things she had imagined he might say, this had not made the list. An apology, perhaps. An explanation. Some attempt at closure. But not this. You are asking me for employment. I have experience in luxury markets, high-level negotiations, strategic partnerships. You have experience destroying everything you touch. Vivian interrupted coolly. I have followed Ashford Holdings' collapse with great interest. Dominic's jaw tightened. I made mistakes. Mistakes. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the detached interest of an entomologist examining an insect. Is that what you call leaving me at the altar in front of 500 people? A mistake. Vivian. Or perhaps you mean the affair you conducted with my cousin while I was tasting wedding cakes and choosing flowers. Was that a mistake too? Color flooded Dominic's face, then drained away just as quickly. I was wrong. About everything. I know that now. How convenient that you have developed self-awareness exactly when you need something from me. He took a step closer to her desk. I deserve everything you are thinking about me right now. Every harsh thought, every bit of anger. But I am desperate, Vivian. My father is sick. The company is days from bankruptcy. I have nowhere else to turn. Vivian stood, moving to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, full of people fighting their own battles, nursing their own wounds. 5 years ago, she had been one of them. Broken, humiliated, certain she would never recover. Do you know what I learned the day you left me at that altar? She asked quietly, still facing the window. What? That the only person I could ever truly depend on was myself. She turned to face him. You did me a favor, Dominic. You shattered my illusions about love and partnership. You taught me that trust is a luxury I cannot afford. And in doing so, you freed me to become this. She gestured at the office, at the empire she had built from ashes. So in a way, I should be thanking you. So you will not help me. I did not say that. Hope flickered across his face, pathetic and desperate. Vivian returned to her desk, opened a drawer, and withdrew a file. She slid it across the polished surface toward him. This is an employment contract. She said. Entry-level position in our supply chain management division. $45,000 a year. No executive authority. No decision-making power. You will report to a 26-year-old manager named James who graduated from Rutgers. Dominic stared at the contract as if it were written in a foreign language. You are offering me a job in the mailroom, essentially. I am offering you a chance to prove you can actually work for something instead of inheriting it. Vivian corrected. Take it or leave it. I genuinely do not care which you choose. The man who had once held her heart in his hands stood before her desk, pride and desperation warring across his features. Vivian felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no lingering love. Just a cool, professional detachment that 5 years of building an empire had honed to perfection. I will take it. Dominic said finally, the words barely above a whisper. Good. Start Monday. 8 a.m. sharp. Grace will process your paperwork. She returned her attention to the Swiss partnership proposal. Close the door on your way out. Dominic hesitated as if there were more he wanted to say. But Vivian had already dismissed him from her thoughts, her pen moving across the page with confident strokes. The door clicked shut. Alone in her office, Vivian set down her pen and pressed her fingers against her temples. Her hands trembled. The only outward sign of the earthquake that had just occurred beneath her carefully constructed composure. Dominic Ashford, begging for a job in her empire. The universe had a twisted sense of poetry. Monday morning arrived with the kind of brutal punctuality that waits for no one. Dominic stood outside the Maison Moreau building at 7:55, staring up at the gleaming tower of glass and steel. Somewhere on the 42nd floor, Vivian was probably already at work. First in, last out. He had read that about her in a profile. He took the elevator down, not up. The supply chain management division occupied the basement level. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The carpet was industrial grade, designed for function rather than aesthetics. Dated furniture and shared desk spaces created an environment worlds away from the executive offices he had once inhabited. James Patterson, his new manager, looked up from a computer screen as Dominic approached. He was young, sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity that came from having worked for everything he had. "You are Ashford," James said. It was not a question. "Yes. I am here too." "I know why you are here," James interrupted. "And I do not care about your last name or who you used to be. We start at 8, not 8:05. Do not be late again." Dominic glanced at the clock. It was 7:58. Understood. The work was mind-numbing and humbling in equal measure. Inventory tracking. Shipment coordination. Vendor relations for suppliers Dominic had never heard of. Data entry that made his eyes cross. Filing that seemed designed to break the spirit. His co-workers whispered. He caught fragments of conversations that stopped when he approached. "Is not that the guy who left that CEO at the altar? Ashford Holdings, right? I heard his company is bankrupt. What is he doing here?" Lunch was a microwaved meal eaten alone in the break room. Dominic stared at the bland pasta and thought about executive lunches at Le Bernardin. Expense accounts. Respect that had been given freely because of his last name, not earned through effort. This was penance. He understood that. But understanding did not make it easier. Week 3 brought an unexpected encounter. Dominic was delivering reports to the executive floor. The elevator ride-up felt like the longest 42 floors of his life. His heart hammered as the numbers climbed. The executive level was a different world. Plush carpeting. Original art on the walls. The scent of expensive coffee rather than the burnt drip from the basement pot. Through glass conference room walls, he saw Vivian commanding a meeting with Japanese investors. She spoke with fluid confidence, gesturing to presentations that illustrated growth trajectories and market expansion. Every person in that room hung on her words. She did not even glance his way. Grace, the assistant, appeared at his elbow. "You can leave those on the desk." Dominic set down the reports and turned to leave. As he did, he overheard executives talking near the elevator. "She has tripled our market value in 2 years." One said. "Absolutely remarkable. Best decision the board ever made, promoting her to CEO." Another agreed. This company would be dead without Vivian Moreau. The elevator doors closed on their praise, leaving Dominic in descending silence. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how far Vivian has come? From a woman crying at the altar to a CEO who is literally employing the man who destroyed her. If that is not strength, I do not know what is. Show some love. Hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of comeback and resilience. Month 4 brought the company Christmas party. Or rather, 2 company Christmas parties. The executive celebration was held at a 5-star hotel ballroom. The supply chain division gathered in the basement break room with cheap wine and pizza. Dominic stood with a paper plate, watching his co-workers laugh and exchange gifts. He had bought nothing, knowing he had not earned the right to participate in their camaraderie. His phone buzzed. Instagram notification. Someone had tagged Maison Moreau in a post. Against his better judgment, he looked. Vivian stood in a stunning gown from her own collection. Midnight blue silk that caught the light like water. She was laughing at something someone had said, her head thrown back, genuinely joyful. Surrounded by people who respected and admired her. The life he could have had. Thrown away because he had been too much of a coward to stand beside a woman stronger than himself. Dominic closed the app and poured his wine down the sink. Month 5 brought a crisis and an opportunity. A shipment error threatened to cost the company $200,000. Leather goods meant for Dubai had been routed to Singapore. The supplier was claiming the mistake was on Maison Moreau's end. Singapore was refusing to forward the shipment without additional fees. Dominic was reviewing the documentation when he noticed the discrepancy. The routing codes did not match the original purchase order. The supplier had made the error, not the company. He brought it to James's attention with documentation to prove it. James studied the papers, then looked at Dominic with something approaching respect. "Good work, Ashford. Did not think you had it in you." It was small validation. But it felt meaningful in a way that board appointments and inherited titles never had. Month 6 brought another elevator encounter. This time, Dominic and Vivian were alone. The doors closed, sealing them in together for 42 floors. Silence thick with history surrounded them. "How are you finding the work?" Vivian asked, her voice professionally distant. "It is humbling," Dominic admitted. "Good." She did not look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the ascending numbers. "Humility suits you better than arrogance ever did." The elevator dinged. 42nd floor. She stepped out without looking back. But something had shifted. A crack in the armor, perhaps. Or perhaps just acknowledgement that he still existed. Month 8 changed everything. A major shipment crisis threatened a $5 million Japanese contract. The supplier in Italy had gone bankrupt suddenly, unexpectedly. Leather goods for Vivian's signature collection, meant to debut at Tokyo Fashion Week, were delayed indefinitely. Dominic was working late in the basement when he overheard the emergency meeting through the ventilation system. Executives panicking. Vivian's calm voice trying to find solutions that did not exist. He remembered something. His grandfather had been owed a favor in the Italian leather industry. A debt of honor that had never been called in. The Ashford name still carried weight in certain circles, even if the fortune had evaporated. Dominic made a choice. He could stay in his lane, or he could risk overstepping. He opened his email and typed directly to Vivian. "I might have a solution." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Her response came within minutes. "My office. Now." Dominic took the elevator up, heart pounding. When he entered her office, Vivian was standing at the window, arms crossed. "Explain." "My grandfather was owed a favor by the Marchetti family. They run one of the largest leather operations in Tuscany. If I call in that debt, why would you help me?" She interrupted, turning to face him. "Because despite everything, I do not want to see you fail." The vulnerability in his admission seemed to catch her off guard. "Make the call," she said. Dominic used her desk phone, placing the call to Italy. He spoke in halting Italian, invoking his grandfather's name. Explaining the situation. Calling in a favor that had been sitting dormant for 30 years. The Marchetti patriarch listened. Then agreed. Leather goods would be expedited. Tokyo Fashion Week was saved. Vivian watched the entire exchange in silence. When he hung up, she studied him with new eyes. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "Do not make me regret trusting you." She added, the old wound still fresh. "I will not," Dominic promised. He was promoted the following week. Vendor relations. A small office with a window view. $65,000 salary. Still not executive level, but progress. James shook his hand. "She does not give second chances. You earned this." The words meant more than any board appointment ever had. Month 12 brought the company anniversary gala. Dominic was invited. His first major company event. He bought a suit he could afford, not the one he wanted. He arrived alone. Vivian gave a speech about rising from ashes, building from ruins, about the strength that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. She never mentioned him directly, but everyone knew. The applause was thunderous. After the party, Dominic found himself alone on the terrace. City lights sparkled below like earthbound stars. He held a champagne glass but had not drunk from it. The door opened behind him. Vivian stepped out, still in her midnight blue gown. She stood beside him at the railing, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something she had created for Maison Moreau. Sophisticated and complex. "I owe you an explanation," Dominic said. "You owe me nothing. That debt can never be paid. Let me try anyway." She said nothing, so he continued. "I was terrified of you. Of your strength, your ambition. Margot was easy. Unchallenging. She asked nothing of me." He turned to face her. "You were going to eclipse me, and my ego could not handle it. I was a coward who chose comfortable over real." Vivian listened, her face unreadable. "You want to know what hurt most?" She finally spoke. "Not the affair. Not even the public humiliation. It was realizing I had loved a man who never actually existed. The Dominic I loved would not have been threatened by my success. He would have celebrated it. But that man was my imagination." Tears slipped down her cheeks. The first time he had seen her cry since the altar. "I built all of this on a foundation of pain you created. Every success is mixed with the memory of that day. So no, Dominic, your apology does not fix anything." Her voice softened. "But maybe it is a start. What do you want from me?" She asked. "I do not know. Forgiveness feels too much to ask. But I want to prove I am not that man anymore. The one who ran. The one who chose wrong. Then prove it." Vivian said. "Not to me. To yourself." She walked back inside, leaving him on the terrace. But this time, she looked back. A glance that carried something. Possibility, perhaps. Or simply acknowledgement that they were both different people now. The following months brought a rhythm. Dominic excelled in vendor relations. He worked harder than he ever had in his life. Not for promotion or recognition, but for penance. For proof. He took on projects no one wanted. Stayed late. Went above and beyond. Not making a show of it, just doing the work. Vivian watched from a distance, saying nothing. Small moments accumulated. Her thanking him for a well-done report. Him holding the elevator without expecting conversation. Professional respect slowly rebuilding. Month 16 brought tragedy. Dominic's father passed away. The funeral was small. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and built empires was mourned by a handful of people. His fortune gone, his legacy crumbled, his disappointment in his son unspoken but understood. Vivian attended. She stood in the back, dressed in simple black. When Dominic saw her, something in his chest cracked. After the service, she approached. "I am sorry for your loss." "He saw what I became," Dominic said quietly. "At least there was that. At least he saw me finally trying." She nodded, understanding the complicated grief of disappointing a father and losing the chance to fully make it right. Year 2 brought an unexpected offer. A competitor reached out to Dominic. Vice president position. $250,000 salary. Corner office. Everything he thought he wanted. He sat in Vivian's office, the offer letter in his hands. "I received an offer." Her face remained neutral. "Congratulations. You have earned it." "I am not taking it." Surprise flickered across her face. The first time he had caught her off guard in months. "Why not?" "Because I am not finished here. Not finished proving." "Proving what?" She challenged. "That I can build something instead of destroying it. That I can be worthy of second chances." The air between them charged with unspoken meaning. Vivian stood, walking to her window. The same window where she had told him he did her a favor years ago. Dominic, I have spent 2 years watching you. Waiting for you to revert, to show your true colors. But you have not. She turned to face him. I do not know if I can ever forgive you for that day. But I am starting to believe you are not the same man who ran. So what do you think? Should Vivian give Dominic a real second chance at love? Or is some betrayal too deep to forgive? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your take on this. 3 years after Dominic started working at Maison Moreau, the landscape had shifted in ways neither of them had predicted. He was now Director of International Relations. Not C-suite, but respected. A position he had earned through relentless effort and proven results. The Italian connection had opened doors throughout Europe. His work had directly contributed to Maison Moreau's expansion into markets that had previously been inaccessible. Vivian's company had reached a $4 billion valuation. Expansion into watchmaking had been wildly successful. Waiting lists for Moreau timepieces stretched 2 years. They worked together often. Professional meetings that sometimes ran long. Strategy sessions over coffee that occasionally veered into personal territory before one of them pulled back. Something existed beneath the surface. Unacknowledged but undeniable. A charity gala brought everything to a head. The event echoed their first meeting years ago. Same venue. Same crowd of Manhattan elite. But everything else had changed. Vivian wore a stunning Moreau gown, emerald green silk that brought out the gold in her eyes. Dominic wore a bespoke suit he had saved for. Not inherited money, but earned. He approached her near the end of the evening. Would you like to dance? The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone watching, waiting for her response. Vivian considered him. 3 years of watching him work. 3 years of waiting for the mask to slip. 3 years of him proving, slowly and consistently, that he had changed. She extended her hand. On the dance floor, they moved together with the ease of people who had once known each other intimately. The years apart had not erased that muscle memory. I do not hate you anymore. Vivian admitted softly. I do not hate myself anymore either. He replied. That is progress. She said with the hint of a smile. The song ended. They stood in the middle of the dance floor, the past swirling around them like ghosts. I am not the woman you left at the altar. Vivian said. I will never be her again. I know. And I am not asking you to be. I am not even asking for a second chance. I just wanted you to know that meeting you, losing you, earning my way back into your orbit, even just professionally, has been the most important journey of my life. She studied his face, looking for deception and finding only truth. I do not know what happens next. She said honestly. Neither do I. But maybe not knowing is okay. They left it there. Unresolved but honest. No fairy tale ending, no dramatic reconciliation. Just 2 people who had destroyed and rebuilt themselves, standing in the wreckage and the renewal, acknowledging that some stories do not have neat conclusions. What matters is this. Vivian learned that her darkest moment could become her greatest catalyst. That being abandoned at the altar, as devastating as it was, freed her to build an empire on her own terms. She learned that the only person she could truly depend on was herself, and that lesson made her powerful beyond measure. Dominic learned that you cannot inherit character. You have to build it. That privilege without effort is a hollow foundation. That the hardest work of his life, the most humbling experience, working his way up from the basement in the company of the woman he had destroyed, was also the most meaningful. They both learned that forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about freeing yourself. Vivian's power came not from revenge, though she certainly could have destroyed him, but from choosing her own path. From deciding that his betrayal would not define her story. And they learned that second chances are not given. They are earned. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of integrity built upon another until the foundation is solid enough to stand on. Will Vivian and Dominic find their way back to each other romantically? That remains unwritten. Some stories are still unfolding. Some endings are not endings at all, but beginnings of something new. What matters is not who they end up with, but who they became. Vivian stands at the pinnacle of an empire she built from ashes, untouchable and complete within herself. Whether she chooses to share that with Dominic is secondary to the fact that she became everything she was always meant to be. Dominic rebuilt himself from entitled heir to a man who understands the value of earned respect. Whether Vivian forgives him completely is less important than the fact that he finally learned to forgive himself. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about second chances, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Stephen's stories for more powerful tales of resilience, redemption, and the strength of the human spirit. Remember, you are never defined by what breaks you. Only by what you build from the pieces. I will see you in the next story.